about the institutions and the independence of such institutions and their leadership when it comes to human rights, Professor?
Well, you know, we're doing an action plan at the moment. The ministry has done an initial draft with a lot of committees. But very interestingly, the minister appointed a high-powered committee to go into this. And of course, we all agreed that an institutionalization is important, but so are the individuals. You know, you must have individuals able to exercise their duties in a responsible way, and we have had a lot of shortfalls in this, partly because we have shortfalls in capacity in a lot of areas in this country. Part of it is that very capable people tend to be snapped up. You know, one of the problems of this strange NGO culture that has emerged is the massive salaries that they pay, which means that people are not that happy to do government jobs. So, you know, very capable people get swept away. That, I think, can be remedied because we have a lot of talented people. We need to do much more training. I think one of the reports that some of us as secretaries have been suggesting is a very thorough, let's say, overhaul of public service training mechanisms and ways in which we can move forward with a more professional, high-powered, accountable public service, and also training for, let's say, people like memberships of the judiciary, lawyers and so on, who could then occupy themselves in those statutory bodies that need strong personalities who are at the same time not subject to pressures that would actually upset, let us say, the principles on which a country must be governed. We cannot abdicate our sovereignty and say that decisions have to be made elsewhere. We must make our own decisions because we know perfectly well that when interference comes from abroad, it's very selective and depends on their political agendas as well.
And also, Professor, now I think we should move on to another very important section because it's a run-up to the elections again. So now in the news, the word two-third is something that everybody is familiar about and keeps hearing. So actually, why is the government asking for a two-third? What is the genuine need behind a two-third?
Well, I think it's very important to have some radical constitutional reforms, which the President has pledged in his manifesto, and unfortunately, these need a two-thirds majority. Now, if you had what I would call a more civilized opposition, perhaps you would get it without a two-thirds majority. But unfortunately, we have had for the last 17 years, 16, an opposition that didn't oppose on points it should have opposed on, but opposed on issues of national sovereignty. I think the manner in which Mr. Wijesinghe, leader of the opposition, has behaved is rather sad. Because, for instance, he should have supported the government in its war against terror, but, you know, delivered perhaps more coherent criticisms of economic performance and so on. And I think that would have created trust. But I think the fact that there was ample evidence that, having agreed, he was actually bad-mouthing the government elsewhere, and we ourselves have heard this, was a pity. I think in that respect a leaf could be taken out of the book of the way in which Mrs. Bandaranaike behaved on the war issue, you know, right through the period in which the Jayawarna government was and the Premadasa government was dealing with terrorists, whom they had created also. In all fairness, there was no terrorism in 1977 of the same quality. They managed to, by their actions, create these terrible terrorist movements. But the SLFP at the time was actually quite supportive of the war against terror.
And I guess another lesson.
Living their lives in a brand new town, doing the best they can. For little women are on their own, looking to make their stand. Fortunes of war can change their way, we imagine our lives will be. The March family are on their way, make sure that and waving.
Catch you live in action on Prime TV.
Where do you go?
with a blend of music filled with variety. Rock and roll, country and western,
It must be love. It must be love.
you name it, we have it. Music with Bevel.
Opportunity for the business service providers, academics, policymakers and the general public to have one-to-one dialogue for over 90 minutes with the guest speaker, Mr. Ajit Nimad Kabra, Governor, Central Bank of Sri Lanka, who would speak on Central Bank Roadmap for Sri Lanka on March 23rd between 12 noon to 2 p.m. at Golfways Hotel Colombo, organized by the Small and Medium Enterprise Developers, Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry of Sri Lanka and Friedrich Naumann Foundation.
Can you elaborate on the radical reforms that the government is planning to come out with? If you can elaborate, like especially about the electoral reforms, what are those?
Well, in electoral reform, I think everyone is agreed that this present system is pernicious and destructive. You see, again, PR is a very good idea in principle. I think everyone agrees that the first past the post system proved entirely unsuitable, because if you think of the worst governments we've had, one which I think was wicked, but that was the 77 government, it was because they had a 5/6 majority. The 1970 government was incompetent, and I think a lot of problems arose. I think they had certain ideas, but they were outdated ideas of statist socialism and so on. But of course, the one saving grace is that Mrs. Manranaik allowed by-elections, so that the 2/3 majority that they had was being whittled away. Jayajawardena didn't even allow that. So I think that type of first past the post system can be unrepresentative. PR, I think, if the government now gets a 2/3 majority, it will represent nearly 2/3 of the people. But the simple point is you need to change the electoral system. Many people have agreed that you want a mix of the two, a first past the post together with PR. And although they paid lift service to the German model, which balances, most proposals have actually assumed that the first past the post will give you a majority. The President made it very clear that that is not what he wanted. He wanted basic first past the post, but making sure that minorities, small parties were represented through a compensatory mechanism. So that will
so there's a special mechanism like for minority representation. What is the mechanism?
Well, the way to do it is not to talk of minorities, because that's the word minority seems to mean racial. What he means is interest groups that will not come in through the first past the post system. And that applies to all interest groups. So it could be minor parties, it could be racial, religious groupings that would not otherwise gain representation. And there is a very good model for this, which is the German model, but of course it needs to be adjusted slightly in terms of our realities. But the President's point is, I must have people represented. The first past the post sometimes prevents that. So that's one area. The second area, of course, is, he has often repeated this, and it's very important, the second chamber, because most parliamentary democracies have two chambers for a variety of reasons. Unfortunately, we inherited the British model, which has the maddest second chamber in the world, and the House of Lords was completely bonkers in the way, now it may have fulfilled a very good purpose 100 years ago when you had landowners and so on, but the British want to reform it. So we had a Senate that was equally bonkers. The way it was appointed was madness, and unfortunately some of the left-wing parties who got rid of the Senate don't understand the importance of a second chamber in a country with a principal constitution, whether it's India or Germany or France or Thailand or Malaysia or America or Russia. You have a second chamber. and that's